At exactly 3:33 in the morning, the deadbolt on the door turned by itself. There were no footsteps, no knock, not a single warning. The security camera, the one Caleb didn't even know he had, captured the door swinging open slowly, silently. But it never showed what opened it. When the police reviewed the footage later, one of the officers refused to finish watching. He just shook his head and walked away. Because the thing that got inside the apartment wasn't there when the door opened, it appeared after. Caleb Morris hadn't slept properly in over a year. He was 36 years old, a former emergency dispatcher. Recently moved into this new, sterile apartment, recently alone. Sleep did strange things to Caleb, or maybe it was the lack of sleep that did them. Every single night, he would wake up at 3:33 a.m., not 3:30, not 3:34. It was always, precisely, 3:33. There was no alarm. No sudden noise from the street below, just this gut-wrenching, bone-deep certainty that something was terribly wrong. He'd lie there, staring at the water-stained ceiling, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird, waiting for a sound that never came. Until tonight, his phone vibrated on the nightstand. A single, sharp buzz that cut through the silence. He fumbled for it, his hand shaking. The screen lit up the darkness, showing a new message. There was no text, no sender ID, just an audio file. The timestamp read 3:33 a.m. With a sense of dread, Caleb pressed play. At first, there was only static. Then, he heard it, breathing. It wasn't his own rapid, shallow gasps. This was slow, wet, like air being forced through damaged lungs, bubbling with each exhale. Then came a whisper, so close it felt like it was right beside his ear. "Don't move." Caleb dropped the phone, as if it were on fire. It clattered to the floor, the screen going dark. When he finally worked up the courage to pick it up again, the message was gone, vanished, as if it had never existed. The next morning, bleary-eyed and on edge, Caleb noticed something new on his phone. An app he didn't recognize. The icon was a simple, stark white eye on a black background. The name beneath it read, "Home Viewed, Active." He knew, with absolute certainty, that he had not downloaded this. His finger hovered over the icon before he tapped it. The app opened instantly. No loading screen, no login. It went straight to a live feed, a grainy, black and white view of a hallway. His hallway, but the camera angle was all wrong. It was too high up, looking down at his front door from the corner of the ceiling. Caleb didn't own a camera like that. He didn't have any cameras. A cold knot tightened in his stomach. As he watched, the feed froze for a second. And then, a shadow materialized at the edge of the frame. It was standing just outside his apartment. Not knocking, not moving, just awaiting. He called the police. 2 officers arrived, looking bored and skeptical. They checked the hallway, running their hands along the ceiling and walls. They found nothing, no camera, no scuff marks, no lingering shadow. One of them, the younger one, offered a polite, practiced smile. "It's probably just stress," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You mentioned you used to work dispatch, right?" Caleb just nodded, feeling a familiar wave of exhaustion. The officer's smile faded just a little. "Yeah, that job messes people up. We see it all the time." They started to leave, but the older officer paused at the door. He turned back, his expression unreadable. "By the way," he said, his voice low, "if you hear knocking tonight, don't open the door." Caleb froze, his blood running cold. "What knocking?" he asked. The officer didn't answer. He just gave a slight shake of his head and closed the door behind him. At 3:33 a.m., the knock came. One single, slow, deliberate knock. It wasn't loud, but it echoed through the apartment, through Caleb's very bones. On his phone, the HomeView app opened on its own. The shadow was there again, but this time, it was inches from the door. Its outline flickered and distorted, as if the camera couldn't decide how tall it was or what shape it had. Caleb held his breath, every muscle in his body screaming at him to run, to hide. The phone on his chest vibrated, a new message. "Unknown. Good. You remembered." Then, he watched in horror as the handle on his front door began to turn, slowly, down, down, down. But the door didn't open, the deadbolt held. Instead, the knocking started again, once every 30 seconds, exactly, on the dot. But Caleb noticed something far worse. Each knock came from a slightly different height on the door. First near the floor, then at waist level, then near the top, as if whatever was outside was changing its size, experimenting, learning. At 3:59 a.m., the knocking stopped as abruptly as it began. The phone buzzed one last time. Unknown, tomorrow, you won't be able to stay still. The next day, desperate for a human connection, any connection, Caleb ran into his next-door neighbor in the hallway, Mrs. Langley, an elderly woman, frail and quiet, with nervous, darting eyes. She stared at him, really stared, for an uncomfortably long time. "You hear it too, don't you?" she said, her voice a dry rasp. Caleb didn't know what to say, he just stood there. She leaned closer, her breath smelling of mothballs and fear. "It doesn't like being watched," she whispered, glancing at the ceiling corner where the phantom camera should be. "That's why it takes the eyes first." That night, her apartment was eerily silent. The next morning, Caleb saw the paramedics. They carried her out in a black body bag. As they passed, the zipper snagged, and for a horrifying second, he saw her face. Her eyes were wide open, but they were completely, unnaturally white. A new kind of terror, sharp and acidic, clawed its way up Caleb's throat. He drove to his old precinct, his hands trembling on the steering wheel. Using his old credentials, which miraculously still worked, he broke into the dispatch archives. He searched for calls logged at exactly 3:33 a.m. Dozens of them popped up, stretching back years. All from his district, all reporting the same thing. Someone standing in their hallway, someone knocking on their door. Someone breathing on the other end of a silent line. Every single one of the callers died within days. Every death was ruled as natural causes. Heart failure, respiratory arrest, simple, tragic shock. He scrolled to the bottom of the logs, his heart pounding in his ears. Dispatcher ID, the last dispatcher to take those calls, was him, Caleb Morris. The audio messages on his phone returned that night. But this time, they were longer, voices layered over each other in a chaotic symphony of fear. People crying, whispering prayers, begging for help. And then, a voice cut through the noise, a familiar voice, his own. Screaming, panicked, during a call he had no memory of ever taking. "I'm still here," his recorded voice shrieked. "Why didn't you send help? You just listened, you just listened." Caleb collapsed against the wall, the phone dropping from his numb fingers. It vibrated on the floor. "Unknown, you listened then, now you'll stay." At 3:33 a.m., there was no knock. There was just a click, the deadbolt unlocked. The camera feed on his phone showed it clearly. The hallway was empty, utterly empty. But the door swung open anyway, the temperature in the room plummeted. An arctic cold washed over Caleb, pinning him to the spot. He couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't even breathe. Something had entered the room. The camera didn't show it, the feed remained fixed on the empty, open doorway. But Caleb's body reacted against his will. His chest rose and fell in a sharp, painful gasp. His eyes, wide with terror, tracked something unseen as it moved around the room. The phone on the floor slid across the hardwood by itself, stopping at his feet. One final message glowed on the screen: unknown, dispatch received. The police found Caleb the next morning, seated on the edge of his bed. His eyes were wide, his mouth was open, as if he were listening intently to a conversation no one else could hear. There were no injuries, no signs of a struggle. On his phone, they found a new app. The icon was the same stark white eye, but the name had changed. HomeView, transferred, the live feed was active. But now, the hallway camera was facing outward, from his apartment, looking down the empty hall, waiting. In the bottom corner of the screen, the timestamp read 3:32 a.m., and then, it changed. Somewhere tonight, a phone will vibrate. Someone will wake up at exactly 3:33 a.m., their heart pounding with a nameless dread. And a door will unlock by itself, because once it learns your routine, it doesn't need to knock anymore.